So my name is Kurt. I'm a senior software engineer for Plentina, and right now I'm doing a lot of full stack development. But I really started as an Android developer, and I specialize in it, and it's really where I guess where I enjoy development the most. So yeah, so I did this talk last month in GDG Philippines. So it's really nice to be talking about it again and um, just spreading the word about Jetpack Compose. Like Desmond said, like it's really a shiny new thing, and it's going to make the development much easier. So yeah, Jetpack Compose is a hot topic. So I just want to start by giving like a brief background, I guess. So Jetpack Compose was actually announced like way back 2019, like in Google I/O, and yeah, they have been like teasing us about this since then. And they first released the developer preview of this in October 2019. And they were developing out in the open, trying to get feedback from a lot of developers, trying to see what we would like, what would be useful. And just last year, in August 2020, they released the first version of this alpha. Um, and the focus here was like to iron out the API on like how we would be using Jetpack Compose. And yeah, again, like Desmond said, like the beta has been out, like just like a few months ago in February. And I guess now the focus is to make it more performant, maybe fix some bug fixes, before we put it into stable. So this is a brief background, and Jetpack Compose is it's really good. So let's just dive right into it. So let's see what Jetpack Compose is. So Jetpack Compose. So Jetpack Compose is Android's modern toolkit for building native UI. So it's making Android UI development much more modern, drawing inspiration from a lot of modern tools right now. Like for example, Flutter. What else? We have Litho, React, and Vue, and just trying to bring out the modernness of those tools into Android. Making our development experience much better. So with Jetpack Compose, we would be able to have first less code. Your code with Jetpack Compose would be intuitive. It's still going to be powerful, and with all of those in mind, it would lead us to like a faster development process. So, but still, okay, Jetpack Compose. So why is Jetpack Compose here? To start, I wanted to give like a classic example about Compose. So let's start with everything with how everything starts, which is a hello world. So let's see how this pans out. Um, so yeah, when you do this in the current system, this is what you do, right? So you create your XML layout. I have a vertical linear layout with the text view, and then I bind that to my activity. So I use that layout, and then I get an um, instance of the text view, and I change the text, and there we go. I have my first Android hello world, right? So, but how does this look in Compose? This is all you need. So I just set my content. I have a material theme, and I have a text saying hello world. So I don't know about you, but the first time I saw this, I was like literally mind blown. What like this is what we need for Compose. I've been doing this so tediously before. So I don't know. It's just really like fun to like always showcase this example, and just with this like we reduce like the code. So yeah, what else can you do with Compose? It's so easy to reuse components. You can make composable functions. Like here, I'm saying I have a greeting, and I can pass in a name. So when I pass a name, I'm going to create the text saying hello to that name. So if I have this composable, I can just reuse that and create greetings from to different things. So greeting to Android, a greeting to Jetpack Compose, and that's reusable. So yeah, those are just like quick examples about it. But really, like why Jetpack Compose? Is it just like eye candy for us, or like ergonomic? So yeah, it actually tries to solve a few problems. So the first is they wanted to unbundle the UI toolkit from the platform releases. So let's say we have a bug in like Android 11, and there's a bug in the view system, and someone from the team like fixes it tomorrow. So even if they fix that tomorrow, we won't be able to get that, and that's because it's bundled with the platform release. So we have to wait for Android 12 to get that fixed. So us as developers, we have to wait for that, along with our product consumers. So it's quite hard to do that. But with Jetpack Compose, the UI toolkit is separate from the platform, so they can release separate Jetpack Compose fixes. That's really unbundled from the Android version. Next, fewer technology stack flowcharts. So as we've seen earlier, we've completely removed the XML aspect of our UI, and it's just nice to be just working with Kotlin, and it can also clarify state ownership and handling. We'll dive right into that later. And yeah, the last thing is ergonomics. So we'll be able to write less code. So yeah, so these are some of the things that Jetpack tries to solve, and aside from being modern, it tries to do these things. So Yeah, it's there's some brief, I guess, concepts about it. So let's start composing. So start with the building blocks, which are components. So here I just have a simple screen, trying to showcase the different components. So we have like a top app bar, we have the text button, different kinds of buttons, a card, and maybe a bottom app bar. So let's try on like how we can like put this inside the code. So there are a lot more components, but I just tried to choose a few and like see how we can use them. So yeah, let's start. So as our entry point for our applications, we have our activity, right? So in this activity, what we only actually have to look at is the set content function. So this set content function is where we would be putting our compose code. So instead of set content view and then binding it to your XML layout, you put your compose code here, and that's it. So let's remove the other code and let's just focus on here. So if I want to add the text, I can just say, hey, I want the text, and I can pass in the text parameter, and I'm just giving it like a string of text. So okay, now I've done the text. Now, how do I see this? So with the XML layout, at XML layouts, we have our layout editor available, right? But with Compose, we don't have that, but we have another thing, which is like our preview. So before we get into that, I'm gonna try and extract this. So I'm going to make a demo composable and use that. So since I extracted that function, I can reuse that in another function. So I'm gonna go ahead and make another function saying preview demo. So what's new here is that aside from the composable annotation, I added this at preview annotation, and this at preview annotation tells Android Studio that, hey, I want to view what this looks like. So I want to view what demo looks like, and now in our IDE we would be getting this. So there we go. Now we see how this demo composable that has a text component which has a text string, and we can see that in the preview. Like here's text. So the preview is actually quite powerful. So aside from just being to preview your code, you can see that there are two buttons over there. So one, the other button is that you can run this specific composable to an emulator. So this is really powerful because like if you have a really large app and you just want to test like one specific composable, um, you can just you don't have to compile your whole app. You can just you can just like really run this really small package composable and test how that runs in a device. And that's really good, especially I've been dealing with like a projects that have a large uh, build time. So with this feature, it's really nice to like just choose a small thing and like test that out in isolation. So that's really nice. The next button is like for interactive mode. So here, you can also run your composable in your IDE for quick verification. So you don't even have to deploy it to your emulator. We know how emulators are really expensive, especially when you have a not really powerful device. So it's really good that we have these tools in preview. So so yeah, there we go. We can make our compose components and we can preview them. So okay, let's go back and like dive into components again. So here's my demo. What if I want to add another button? So I can just go ahead and add my button code. So here's my button, and I'm just passing parameters like a non-click function, which is which does nothing right now, and inside that button there's a text that says button. So since we've configured the preview for this, we're now going to see this in our IDE. So there we go. Now we have the button, right? So, but okay, where's the text? I thought we have two components. We have text and the button. So what's happening here? So now this would lead us to the next thing, so which is layouts or positioning our components. So with positioning our components, I think the three building blocks.
The time is 7:15 p.m.
So the building blocks is we have our column, our row, and our box, which stacks our components vertically, horizontally, or if you want to stack them on top of each other, use a box. And it's pretty simple and straightforward to use. So going back, we have our text and our button. If I want to position this in a vertical manner, I can just put them inside the column, and there we go. Now I have my components in a vertical manner. They're stacked on top of each other vertically. And if I want to show this horizontally, I can just change column to a row, and we can do that. So you can also nest all of those. You don't have to worry about nesting them like with our XML layouts. So they're really performant. So yeah. So moving on, let's try to make this example that I showed earlier, and let's try to position the elements in this way, and let's just see what parameters we can configure. So first, I just add the different components. So it's pretty simple, like we did with the text and the button. I'm just going to add those components. The top app bar, text buttons, different kinds of buttons, the card, and the bottom app bar. So now we have this. So I've added the different components. So let me just omit this for brevity. And the next thing now that we want to do is maybe let's try to add the white background to it. So now I can just put this inside the box. And this is where I would introduce this concept of modifiers. So the modifiers is what we can use to configure our attributes. So let's say if we're comparing this to XML, the modifiers would be our attributes, and this would just be where you would specify how a component would behave, how it would be laid out, how it would be styled. So in this case, I'm saying that, hey, I want the box and I want it to have like a background of white, and inside that box we have a column. So which is why we have those. So okay, that's one configuration. Now I want it to occupy the whole device screen. So and then I can just go ahead and say, hey, I want you to fill the maximum size. So there are a lot of modifiers that we can add, and they're pretty simple to use. So there we go. What's next? Okay. Now yeah, we have the whole screen being filled out. Now we wanna align and position the components inside them. So we want them to look like this. So there are more parameters here. So like we can check the column, and we can set the vertical arrangement and the alignment of them. So here I'm just saying that the vertical arrangement is I want them to have some space in between. So I want some space between the top app bar and the text, space between the text and the button and the text button, and so on and so forth. And I want all those components to be centered horizontally. And just by adding those two parameters, they're aligned correctly, right? So it's pretty simple to position your layouts. So what's next? We want this floating action button. So what I'm going to do here now is, I can just add this box, and I can say, hey, I want my floating action button over here. And the reason why I put this box over here is so that I can just change the content alignment to it. So I want the floating action button to be placed at the bottom end, which is the lower right. So there we go. You can also do that. So yeah, now we have this basic screen, right? Now it's a basic material design layout. So this is how you can play around with the components, the building blocks, like the columns, the rows, and the boxes, and you can pretty much build anything you want on top of it. But if you're there's also an easier way to do this. So this is actually Material Design's basic layout. So they also provided an API for it, which is the scaffold layout. So this is a pretty simple API, which is a slot-based API where we can just configure, the top app bar, the bottom bar, the background color, and we can specify our content and such. But I just wanted to show that, if you understand how to use the columns, the rows, and the boxes, you can pretty much, position everything how you want them. And, it's that easy. But you can also make, these kinds of APIs to make your life easier or use them. But if you want something more custom made, it's easy to use them. You can go ahead and just make a custom implementation using those. So okay, we've had the components. You can position them. Now let's look into a more classic use case in Android development, which is lists. There's always lists in an Android app. So okay, let's try this simple example, which is just a contacts app. You can see your contacts. There's a sticky header on top. You scroll through it, and it's just a list of contacts, and you can just scroll through it, and that's the example. So in the current in the current way that we're doing it, it's actually quite a lot. Like you have to do this, and first you have to create your your item layout. So you have to create your XML layouts. One for the recycler view layout, and then one for your contact item layout, and then one for your header. And then after doing that, you're going to bind them to your activity. And you have to bind your recycler view to your activity. You have to make a list adapter. You have to make sure that your recycler view is binded to your list adapter. You have to make sure your list adapter generates the correct layout with depending on the type. And there's just a lot of things that you have to do. If you're an experienced developer, this might be kind of basic. But if you're new, it looks pretty daunting. And even me, sometimes I get tired of making a recycler view because there are a lot of things you have to tie up together. So with Compose, we're gonna see how this is much easier. So let's start by defining what our model is. So here, I'm just saying we have a contact, and the contact has a name and a phone number. So we're going to translate this object or this data model into UI. So the first thing we do is we generate the the item. So here's the contact item. So we just make it so I have a row over here, and inside that row I'm gonna have my column of text, which is the name and the phone number, and on the other side I have my icon button, which is I guess the call icon, like the phone icon. So yeah, it's that. It's pretty simple. And when we look at the header, it's also simple. It's just again another column, and then we have our text for the initial, and you won't be able to see it, but there's a divider, that's it's there to separate the header from the items. So yeah, okay. We've made our composable. It's that easy. So now how do we generate the list? So here I just have my simple list object of contacts. I got fake names from a fake API and fake numbers. So there we go. And to generate these and convert this into UI, to a list UI, I just have to do a simple for each. So for each of my contacts list, I want you to generate a contact item based on those. And just by doing this, now we have our list. So it's that simple, right? No recycler view, no list adapter, no binding, no whatever, no yada yada. I just have to do a for each and say, hey, I want this model to be generated. And that's it. Now we have our list. So it's pretty easy to like generate lists in Compose. And I don't know, it's just really a breath of fresh air, I guess. So yeah, so let's try to move on. So let's try to generate the header. Okay, so I added more code. I want to have a header to it. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to sort my contacts by name. So I want to sort them alphabetically. And the next thing I'm going to do is I want to group those contacts by their first letter. I want contacts that start with letter A to be grouped together, that starts with letter B, so on and so forth. And I'm just going to retrieve that grouping. And for each grouping, I want to see what the grouping is. So I want this the group that starts with the specific letter to be generated and every contact inside it. So there we go. I'm just creating a contact header and I pass in the letter of the grouping. And for each of the contacts inside the grouping, I generate a contact item for it. So by doing this, now we have our list. So there we go. It's super easy. We have our header, we have our contacts. And so what's wrong with this? So here, you can see that there's that circle that trying to go up, and that's me trying to like swipe up. And this is a list, but nothing's happening. So why isn't this list swiping up? So and here, this is where we should configure our behavior. So here I just added this vertical scroll modifier, and you can see now in the GIF that it's already scrolling. So there we go. Now you have your list. You have your header, you have your contacts, and it's a perfectly working list. So is it then? No, not actually. So this is actually still not, it's working, but it's still not efficient. So one thing with the column is that it would generate everything inside that you put inside it. So let's say we have 100 contacts over that list. So if you use a column, it would generate all 100 of those contacts. And if you look at the screen, you may be seeing 100 of those contacts at once. You would be seeing maybe 10, maybe even less. And it doesn't make sense to generate everything out of that, right? Because like you don't need it yet. So if you generate 100 and you just need 10, like you're kind of wasting memory for the other 90 contacts. So they added an API to make this more efficient. So to prevent that from happening, from us wasting resources, they added this lazy column API. So with the lazy column API, we don't even need like the gesture modifier, but it would lazily generate your composables depending on like what needs to be laid out on the screen and so on and so forth. So we just had to change a few things. So instead of doing a for each, they provided this items function, and just passing your models over there, it would handle the lazy generation of those composables. And they added the sticky header function. I didn't have to do anything. I just had to wrap my header in like a sticky header function, and yeah, you can see in the recording that the header sticking, and you won't see that it's efficient, but it is efficient. So there you go. It's that easy to make lists. So yeah, this is a pretty basic example. You can try your own examples and go crazy, and it's just good. It's just good. So okay, let's move on. So now we've been presenting things. We've been trying to make our UI. So now let's talk about state and try to give life to our apps and try to make them work. So by their definition, so state is an app state in an app is any value that can change over time. So like they said, it's a broad definition. It could be like your room database. It could be like a variable in your class. But let's try to explain this in an example again. So here I have an example of like an error view. There's a retry button, and when I click on the retry button, it tries to retry and try to load the API. And to me, the state is what tells this screen that, hey, I have an error, or hey, I don't have an error, that would lead me to generate the whole what do you call this? Generate the correct component. So again, let's dive into the code. So first things first, let's figure out our UI. So we have our column, um, we have our icon, we have our text message, and then we have our button. So there we go. So now, how do we add state to this? So I'm just gonna omit some stuff for brevity. And how do we add state to this? So I can just add this variable. So here I just said I added an API has error variable, and there are things happening here. So it's trying to remember, and there's a mutable state of a Boolean value. So what is this? So first we have this Boolean value of a mutable state to the Boolean value rather. So this mutable state object is an observable I guess object for compose. So this is where we keep our states in the compose world. So when a state changes, it would trigger a recomposition of a composable. So when we change this value to false, it would try to retrigger, recompose our composable, and generate how this composable should be depending on the state. So that's how it works. So next, we have this remember statement. So what's this remember statement? So when we change this the state of a function, it triggers a recomposition, right? When you do that recomposition, it's going to run through this code again. If you don't remember the value, it's just going to reinitialize it to the default value, which is true. So let's say at some point in time you change true to false, it triggers a recomposition. Now it goes back to true because it's reinitialized. But here, since we're remembering the value, compose would now remember the change that happened, and we have to put this line to tell compose that we have to remember this value. So okay, now we have our state. How do we use this? So now it could be used as a simple Boolean value for some UI logic, saying here, hey, if the API has error value is true, I want you to generate the error view. And then if not, then generate the success content, which is the text saying API 1 was successfully loaded. So what else? Where do we change the state? So here, this is a naive implementation of retry where I'm saying, hey, if I click on the retry button and just change the value to false, so meaning it's just going from an error to a success state. So okay, with that, now we have our composable, fully working with the state. So when I click it, it loads, and that's already it. We've added state to this. This is already working. But what's wrong here? The state is owned by the component. So when we make a composable, we should make it in a way that it's reusable and testable. But with the state being here, it's hard to test. So to give an example, what if we have another API? So right now we have API 1. What if we have API 2, and we wanna use this same error handler for that API call? So should we create another API error handler for specifically for API number 2, or should we just reuse this? So the reason we made this is so that we can reuse this, right? So yeah, so to fix this, what we're going to do is a programming pattern called state hoisting, and it's basically so that's state hoisting, and it's basically just to extract the state here and put it at a higher hierarchy, and so that you can manage the state better. So again, let's dive into the example. So here, instead of managing the state inside this composable, I move them as parameters. So there we can see that they're parameters. So I'm passing the Boolean value if it has an error, and then I'm using that in my if condition, and I'm passing what would happen if I click it, and I'm passing the content that would be generated when there's no error. So I'm extracting the variables and I'm consuming it. So by doing this, we can now this component is already reusable. So I can go ahead and create my API fetching screen, and there we go. I have a state for API 1, and I'm using the error handler composable. So now I want to add my API number 2. So there we go, it's used. So by adding API number 2, I can just create another state and create another error handler for that state, and just pass in the values that that's going to be changed, and it's completely reusable. So now with that, both of those components can live with each of them. So you can see API 1 living on its own, API 2 living on its own, and it's fully reusable, and you can reuse this in many aspects of your code, and the state can be managed well. So there we go. That's state. So this is again a pretty basic example, but I think it's a common one. Like we always load APIs, right? But there are a lot more use cases. This for let's say, for example, maybe you're handling input validation from text fields. Maybe that's one. Maybe you're doing an example of a counter. Maybe that's where you hold your values. Maybe you have a counter that increments by one. Maybe you have another counter that increments by two. So there are a lot of things you could do with states. But yeah, I think states is one of the things that you need to kind of really understand if you want to get into Compose. So yeah, there we go, states. So okay, what's next? So okay, we've displayed our UI. We've tried to make them work with states. Now let's try to make them pretty. So let's do theming. So let's say we have this example over here, and it's a pretty basic example. It looks good, but it's the default, I guess, a default font, default colors, and stuff. So let's try to make it, more interesting, by changing the shape, maybe changing the font, and maybe even supporting dark theme. So just by changes on those, it looks more interesting, right? Like it's a whole new different thing. So with Jetpack Compose, this is also easy. So they provided support for theming, and it's super easy to theme. So going back earlier in our activity or our set content function, so you might have noticed that there's this compose demo theme object over here. So actually, this compose demo theme over here is actually just composable. And in this composable, what's just happening is, it's trying to figure out if, we're going to use dark theme or not. Right now, it's using the system configuration, but, you can pass in your value. And we're just passing in the content that we want to generate. And inside this, it's just basically using this material theme object, which is, what we would use to theme our app based on the material design guidelines. And it's just going to generate those based on like your color configuration, based on like typography, your shape theming, and based on those configurations, your content will be generated. So it's not all magic; it's just all configurations. So let's go into color theming first. So like, how do we theme colors? So it's pretty simple. You just have to understand, what the guidelines is. So there you go. You can have your color schemes. You can have like a primary color, what your primary variant is, a secondary one, what the text is for your background, what the text is for your primary color, and you just have to like really lay out those. So this is the default theme that you would be able to see if you generate like your compose code. So let's try to make our own theme based on the example I showed earlier. So first, I'm going to find my color. So it's a simple definition. I have a blue color, and then a color given the hex value of a color. And what I'm just going to do is I'm going to generate my palette using the light colors function, and pass in the parameters. So I want my primary color to be blue. I want the secondary to be blue as well, and I want the text to be like white and like black depending on like where I want them. So just with this, we now change our screen to this. So, it's a simple change. It changed from, having a purple button to a blue one. So, but it's that easy. So let's try to configure now our dark color palette. So it's the same thing. I give my definition to the green and the dark blue hex codes. And here we go. Instead of using light colors, I use dark colors. And when you run it, now you're going to have this. So now it looks much more interesting, right? So it's that easy to generate your color theme. And it's pretty much configured already in the compose theme. So if we're using dark theme, we use the dark color palette. If not, we use the light color palette, and that just flows down to the material theme configuration, and it will generate your content based on that. So there we go, color theming. So now what about typography? So the typography, I think, is really it really makes your app look more interesting. Like just changing the font correctly already gives it a different a feel, different aesthetic. So it's really nice. So to configure fonts, they have again different guidelines on this. So you have your H1, H2, H3 until 6. So these are your headlines. You have subtitles, bodies, and buttons. So you can configure this on how you want to do them. But yeah, these are the basic guidelines. So yeah, depends on how you want to use them. So here to configure them, I'm just making a font family over here. So I'm just stating a definition of what my fonts should be. So I added my fonts, my TTF files to the project so I can reference them using r.font. But I'm just saying here, hey, here's my font family. And I have a Nunito regular font, and I have a bold font which should use Nunito bold, and I have a light font which is Nunito light. So by adding that, we can use them in this typography object, and like we did with the color configuration earlier, we can just change the values over here. Here I'm saying my headline one text style should be using Nonito, and it should have a font weight of bold. So it goes to the font family object and looks, oh, what's the bold font over here? And it's gonna look at, oh, it's Nonito bold. So that means H1 is going to use Nonito bold, and another configuration, which is the size, which is 96 scaling pixels. So you can do that, and you can do that for the other headlines, and have another configuration. So like, let's say for example, for body one, I have my text style, I'm using the font family Nonito, but this time I'm saying I want you to use the normal font weight. So instead of using Nonito bold, it's going to use a Nonito regular font, because that's how the font family is configured. And you can just configure the size again. So instead of something so big like 96, it's just 16 scaling pixels. So by doing that, now we can see that the design, like I showed earlier, is coming to life. So the font really changed it, and I don't know, to me it just looks more aesthetic. But there you go, the font's been changed. So one thing you might be wondering about is, like, how are the fonts changed? So how do you configure that in your composables? So in your composables, there's a style parameter over there. So you can configure what typography style you want them to use. So here I'm saying that the header, the title rather, is going to use like H6. The date should use a caption style, and the body should use body one. The button should use a button. So you can configure that when you make your composables, and it would use the configuration that you will do. So there you go, typography theming, and which leads us to the last thing, shape theming. So it's pretty simple. You just tell material design how do you want your shapes to look like. So you can have round edges, you can have you can cut corners. Basically, you can tailor them to how you want them. So it's easy to configure them as well. It's just a shapes object. So you have three configurations: small, medium, and large. So I guess the small ones are like for, I guess, buttons and chips. So it's small objects, and the medium one I guess would be for like cards, maybe dialogues, and the large ones would be for the drawer and the bottom bar, I guess. So yeah, you just have to define your configuration for them. So here I'm just saying I want the small objects to have a rounded corner shape. So I want them to be rounded by 50%. So yeah, that's the configuration. So now Compose will do that. And the medium components, I want them to have like a cut corner shape. So I want you to cut the top start, which is like the top left, and like the bottom end, which is like the bottom right. So which is why in this screen, you can see that, they're cut on those edges. So there we go. Just by giving those configurations and passing those to the material theme configuration, you would have those designs. And, again, from where we started, it's much more interesting, and, it's just, more aesthetic to look at, and it makes your design much prettier. So, okay, let's make them even more prettier by adding motion and animation to it. So, yeah, let's try to look at what different kinds of animations we can try to do here. So here's a simple animation for colors. So in this example, I just have this column. It has a background, which is right now it's set to white. And when I click on the buttons, I just change the colors. So if I click the green button, it goes to green. If I click dark blue, it goes to dark blue. So it's pretty simple. So there we go. I'm gonna go click it, turns to green. I click blue, it turns to blue, right? It's pretty simple, but I want to make it fancy. I want to add some animation to it. How do I do that? So it's super easy to make animations in Compose. So I can just add this one line here. I'm just going to say I want to animate the color as a state, and then I pass in my color state. And instead of using the color state, I'm going to use this animated color state and use that in my modifier. And by doing that, now I have quick animations. So there we go. When I click it, you can see it's kind of fading to the color, and it's super easy. Like I just added one line and changed another. So it's just a configuration for two lines, and I already have my animations, right? So it's super nice and super easy to add animations. So this is just for color. So like let's go into something more, I guess, more common, which is size. So it's also pretty much the same thing. So in this example, I have my box. I have a state which says, if it's small or not. If it's small, I give like a different size, and then I use that again in my modifier. And when I click it, it inverts. So big to small, small to big, so on and so forth. So here's how it looks like, and it's just snapping to like a small and big state. It looks good, but always make it prettier with animations. So like we did earlier, when by using animate color as state, we can use animate DP as state. So I can animate dips as state, and pass that again in my parameter, and you can see in this recording that when I click on it, the recording is pretty bad, but it's animating, and there's some motion that's happening to it, and just by that, it's much more pleasing to look at. So there we go, animations. So now, what if we want to animate multiple values? So let's say again in that example, I want to animate the size, but I also want to animate the color. So I can always, add another state and, okay, I'm animating the size and I'm animating now. I want to animate the color and I want to configure that. And, when I click on it, I have to change two states. So this is pretty good. I mean, yeah, you're doing what you want, right? You're animating two states. But think of it, what if you want to animate 5 values? Think of it even more. What if you want to animate 10 values? Would you be copy pasting the same code in like 10 different ways and, changing 10 different states in one on-click function? So that's kind of pretty bad, right? So luckily, they gave us an API for that. So we have the transition API. So here I have my state here, and I'm creating a transition object. And this transition object is based on my state that says this object is small or not. And with that transition, I can make animations. So here, I'm making an animation based on that state, saying, hey, I want to animate the DP based on this transition. And, I'm giving it the values. And same thing I do with the color. So if it's small or big, you give me the right color. And I'm just going to use that in my modifier. And in my on-click function, I'm just going to change one state, which, would go to that transition API and, make the right animations. So now, when we try to do this, you can see that, it's animating much nicely. So it's animating both of the values, so the color and the size. And, I didn't have to like manage multiple states. I just had to use the transition API. So what else? It's really neat, right? But I can't quite appreciate the transition or the animation for the color. So I think it's quite too fast and I can't quite see it. So I'm going to configure that. And we can also do that. So there's a transition spec variable over here where we can change the animation that's happening, or maybe not change, but configure. So here I'm just saying I want the transition to have like a tween of 500. I don't know what tween means, but basically what I'm trying to say here is I want the animation to like last for like 500 milliseconds. And then you can see in the recording that, the animation is much, much more prominent. So you can see it's slower. You can see that it's fading. So you can also do that with your animations. So it's pretty neat. It's so easy to make animations in Compose. So there are a few more. You can also change visibility. So you can animate visibility. I think this is much more common. So let's go back to our example earlier, our error handler state. When we click it, it changes to the success content, right? If not, we go to the error content. So if you want to animate this, you just actually have to change your if statements. So instead of using an if statement, you're just going to change it to animate visibility and then pass in the boolean. And if it's true, it's going to show the content. If it's false, it's going to hide the content. And, it's going to add an animation between that. So, just by changing those lines, we're all adding animation to it. So here's how it looks like. So there we go. You can see like there's some animation happening, right? And I didn't have to like worry about a lot of stuff. I just had to change my if statements to like this animated visibility statement. So it's pretty neat. And another thing I wanted to show is this. We can animate content size. If you're into like something expandable views, it's pretty good. So here I have my expanded state. I'm saying this card is clickable. And if you click it, it just inverts the state from expanded to not expanded. And, the text is just configured. So if it's expanded, I want you to like generate all content by, giving like a max value of integer for the lines. But if it's not expanded, just, limit it to 4 lines. And, to animate this, again, it's super easy. I just have to add 1 line. I just need to say animate content size. And there we go. Now there's some animations to it. When I click it, it expands up and down. And again, super easy to make animations in Compose. So there we go. So we've tried to show components. We have tried to position them. We tried to make them work with states. We tried to make them pretty. So the last thing we have to do is verify them. So let's try and add simple testing to it. So testing is also possible in Compose. So if you're not testing, please do test. It's super crucial. So again, let's go back to our error handler example. It's pretty simple. There's an error. I click retry, then it should be successful. And that's our test case, right? So super simple. and let's just create the test. So this is a UI test, so this is an instrumented test. And what's important here is that we should tell the test that we're testing Compose. So we add the test, we add the rule by using create compose rule. And there we go. Now we add our test case. When I click on retry, it should load the API. So that's just the test case. So given that I have set my content to the API fetching screen, which is the screen where we have that error view, when I find the node with the retry, with text of retry, I want to click on it. And then um, on the node with API 1 was successfully loaded, I should assert that it's displayed. So it's pretty simple. This is my content. I want you to click retry button, and then I want you to look for this specific component. I want you to make sure that that's displayed. So that's just the test. So it's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple API for testing. So it's pretty easy. So there you go. Let's try to see how this plays out. So there you can see me clicking the test. It's trying to run. It's taking quite a while, but yeah, it's running the test. So there we go. There, it happened also quickly, but it clicked the button, it performed the test, and it gave me the result that hey, yeah, this is working. I was able to click the button. I was able to see that text was displayed, and so there you go. So testing is also possible in Compose. So, but this is again a pretty simple example, just to showcase that testing is possible. There are a lot more APIs that you can use, and a lot more complex ones, especially maybe when you're dealing with your site reviews and lists. There are a lot more. There are a lot more things that you can do in testing, but it's possible. And if you test, you should test. So anyway, yeah, that's Jetpack Compose. So we've touched on components. We've showed how to position them, made them work with state, tried to make them pretty with theming and animation, and tried to do some tests to it. So yeah, there's a lot of shiny stuff in Compose. Right now, it's still in beta. I'm still not using it in production myself, but I'm trying to get into it and trying to learn what Compose is. I think it's a great time to learn about Compose so that when it goes to production, you can easily make the switch. And it's just really a great tool. It's a breath of fresh air. From working in Android in the past few years, it's really great. So yeah, this is Compose. So I hope everyone got a lot of information out of this. So yeah, thank you for listening. And I guess if you have questions, yeah, maybe we can take them right now.
Can there be constraints-based UI in Compose?
Yeah, actually, I think there's support being done for constraint layout, but actually, like I've said earlier, like you just only need like the 3 building blocks, which I think is like the column, the row, and the box. So the constraint layout, as far as I know, was built, with the I guess the limitations of like nesting layouts and with linear layouts in the XML way of doing things. So with Compose, it's actually super efficient. You can just nest a lot of layouts, and they've made it in a way that it's efficient. So you actually don't have to kind of worry about going through the constraints thing. But I know there's support. I know there's support with constraint based layout. So we can go ahead and check them out. But yeah, as much as possible right now, I'm trying to move away from them because yeah, that's the problem with like how of like why constraint layout is there, because nesting layout is bad, but right now it's not bad. So we can do it in that way. But yeah, if you want to do it in the constraint layout way, you can also do them. There's support for it.
All right, thanks. Wow. Yeah, I mean, if you insist on using constraint layout, there is support. So yeah, it is good that the skills are still transferable, right?
Yeah.
How about this next question? What's the roadmap for? We have to ask a Googler for that.
Yeah, we have to answer Googler. I don't think we'll be able to answer this.
Right. So sorry, Jack. All right. Questions about list.
Yeah, but maybe to give like some insight on like the previous question. I think like there are 2 different products, but I think like product Flutter is tailored to some. I think you can use it if like you're maybe prototyping or you're trying to move fast, because you can just make it once and you can deploy to different platforms. So Flutter is, you can use Flutter, but I think Jetpack Compose is something different, that if you're working on native Android, it's something you use for native Android. So I think you have to decide whether you have to use Flutter or you have to use native Android with Jetpack Compose. If I'm moving in like a very fast paced I guess project, maybe I would decide to use Flutter as a prototype and try to use that when I validate my product. But when I'm deciding on working on something more stable, maybe I can go native and do something more performant and something more native such as Jetpack Compose. So yeah, that's my take on it. So I think you have to decide on like how you want to use them. They're both there. Yeah, the decision has to be yours. But they're both there. Yeah, you're given the tools. You have to know what tools to use based on your use case.
Very good answer. It depends. All right. Any factory method for pull to refresh?
For pull to refresh, well, I haven't tried the pull to refresh button yet. But for sure there might be because we have a swipe refresh layout, right? I think it's a common use case. So if it's not there right now, there probably would be in the future. So yeah.
Yes, I think that's so. That's the case. So I think right now they are just trying to stabilize the API of the compose, right? So they wouldn't be adding too many features into it, but actually they are already support and contributions by the community for these kind of features like pull to refresh.
Yeah.
Let's move on to some more questions.
What are the concepts and what are the concepts and all the way still valid with using Compose or the way of developing changes completely? Need to learn all the XML ways. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for me I guess it was a paradigm shift. So like I really had to like learn how to change this because we've been doing things like the XML way. I think right now this is what they call like a declarative pattern. So it's kind of a new thing that you have to get into, which is kind of hard, but everything always changes in our industry. So sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. So I think it's a thing we have to accept that things always change. We don't know if it's for the better or not, but yeah, we have to be really adaptive when it comes to these. But as I've said earlier, like some of these new things try to solve the problems that were limitations from the old system. So it's not that bad, trying to move from one technology to another. But again, you have to decide if it's worth it to like move right now or not. So some ways are still, it's still the same concept. Like let's say, for example, having a text, if what you want is to add the text, it's just two different way of saying things. Like in Compose, you just say text, but in the XML way, you create an XML layout, you bind it to your activity, and you say, I want to change the text. So it's still the same way of doing things, or rather, it's still the same thought that you want to do, but it's just a different way of doing things. So there are some similarities to it, but I think it's the how that you kind of want to learn. So yeah, yeah, it's always changing. Yeah, that's what we're in.
Right. That's where the fun is. All right. Yeah. Let's go with a last question. Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Pen here.
I don't know. I don't know. I'll just be doing talks. So yeah.
Right.
I'm always happy to share about Android and what I can do. So yeah.